Hello, everyone, and welcome. I hope this story gives you a chance to relax and unwind after a busy day. If you enjoy stories like this, please support the channel with a like, a share, and a subscription. Your support truly means a lot to me, and it gives me the motivation to keep growing this channel and bringing you more entertaining and enjoyable stories. Thank you so much for being here, and now, let's begin the story. Astor Vale Colony hung at the edge of the Kestrel Corridor, one of the last major freight knots before the outer border thinned into disputed space. The colony had been built into the hollowed stone of an iron-rich moon, then wrapped in decks, shields, water towers, greenhouse rings, and dock spines until it looked less like a city and more like a machine that had learned how to keep people alive. Elias Ward was the man responsible for making sure that machine did not fail under pressure. On the public records, he was the colony's defense commander. To the dock workers, he was the quiet officer who never raised his voice and never promised what he could not hold. To the civilian council, he was useful when trouble stayed outside the walls and difficult when it moved inside them. To Earth Command, he was the kind of officer they sent to places that mattered too much to lose and too little to protect with a fleet. He stood in the command gallery above Port Spine 3 and watched the traffic board thin in real time. The incoming lane from Hesper Reach had gone amber 2 hours earlier, and now it turned gray, with no cargo confirmed, no relief ship cleared, and no explanation that meant anything. Lieutenant Soren Pike stepped up beside him and handed over a tablet. "The grain tender from Cinder Verge just missed its slot," Soren said. "Their captain says he was ordered into a holding pattern outside the corridor." He was not given a release window. Elias read the message once and gave the tablet back. How many days left in the civilian reserve if the next 2 shipments also fail? 8, if distribution stays tight. 6 if the southern tier keeps drawing above ration. And medical stocks? Soren hesitated. Worse. Elias looked through the gallery glass at the dock below. Freight crews were still moving containers, and maintenance arms still crawled along the hull of a fuel barge. Civilians were still working, still walking, still pretending routine had not already begun to crack. That was how pressure worked on a colony. It did not arrive with drums and banners. It came as late cargo, altered schedules, tighter quotas, and system notices written by people far away who would never have to smell a dry recycler. A new light flashed over the tactical display. Unidentified formation entering outer approach. Then a second line rolled under it. Transponder match confirmed. Border Peacekeeping Task Group Sigma. Soren let out a slow breath. That is not relief. No, Elias said. It isn't. The task group came in clean and deliberate, with its codes broadcasting on all open channels and its movements slow enough to look patient, but confident enough to feel insulting. The ships were painted in the pale slate colors used by the Border Stability Commission, the branch of the wider Galaxy Council apparatus that claimed it existed only to reduce tensions and protect trade lanes from regional escalation. Astor Vale was not under military emergency. Not officially. There had been food protests in the southern residential tier, 3 warehouse fights in 6 days, and 1 riot at Water Exchange 9 after purification credits were cut again. But none of that justified a peacekeeping fleet in low approach unless someone wanted it to. A priority channel opened on Elias's console. He accepted it. The face that appeared was narrow, composed, and almost offensively calm. The man wore the polished collar of a task group commander. His skin carried the cool, gray undertone common in the inner systems, and his uniform had no visible weapon seals. That was part of the theater. Commander Elias Ward, the man said, "I am Brigadier Kaler Venn, acting under provisional authority from the Border Stability Commission. We are entering orbital safeguard posture in response to signs of civil instability and possible supply interference affecting this colony. This colony has not requested outside security intervention," Elias said. "Your request is not required under the present framework." Elias said nothing. Venn continued in the same measured tone. "Our presence is preventive. You and your people are advised not to interpret it as hostile. We will temporarily regulate approach lanes, dock clearances, and long-range traffic verification until stability metrics return to acceptable range. You are locking my colonies' throat and calling it preventive. Vin's expression did not shift. I am protecting a sensitive corridor from disorder. Elias leaned one hand on the console. Astor Vale manages one of the largest human freight knots on this border. If you slow our cargo lanes now, you turn shortage into collapse. If your systems are that fragile, Commander, then intervention is overdue. The line stayed quiet for one beat too long. It was a small move, but Vin had made his point. You are weak. We can say you are weak. Then we can arrive because you are weak. Elias answered in the same flat tone. You do not have authority inside our civilian security net or internal dock controls. Not yet, Vin said. Do not force this into a more difficult shape. The channel closed. Soren swore under his breath. He came here loaded for paperwork, not battle. Paperwork kills, just as clean if you stretch it long enough, Elias said. Another priority signal hit the board. This one used an older Earth relay key, one that had not been activated in months except for dead man contingency testing. Elias opened it immediately. The message came in audio only. Damaged. Compressed. Stripped to essentials. Elias, this is Frontier Command. Listen once. You are not to fire first under any circumstance unless there is active mass casualty penetration inside a sealed civilian zone. Repeat, you do not fire first. We are seeing legal positioning across multiple border sectors. If Earth is tagged as initiating force, they will convert at least 6 human colonies to supervised status within a week. Hold discipline. Hold evidence. Hold your people. The message ended. There was no signature, no reassurance, and no false promise that help was close. Soren stared at him. They know. They know enough, Elias said. And they are leaving us here with that. Elias looked back at the traffic board. Another inbound had gone gray. They're telling us what the trap is. That was all Earth could give him for now. By the end of the shift, Task Group Sigma had established a layered orbit around Astor Vale. They had not fired, had not deployed Marines, and had not crossed the line any normal observer would call invasion. They simply took control of timing. All long-range relay packets were routed through their verification grid. Civilian traffic was screened. Dock priority windows were suspended pending instability review, and 2 relief ships from human colonies in adjacent lanes were diverted for inspection. A medical carrier bound for the southern tiers was ordered to hold at a distance too far to unload by shuttle without formal clearance. In the central residential ring, rumors spread faster than oxygen leaks. In the southern districts, ration lines doubled. At the hospital network, Dr. Mara Ilian sent the first red band message of the day. Elias left the command gallery and went down to residential tier south, because by then the crisis was no longer only about orbit. He met her in the main emergency hub beneath the southern housing blocks. The room smelled of antiseptic, recycled air, and metal warmed by too many bodies, and rows of treatment cots filled the outer ward while families sat close together in exhausted silence. Mara met him near a diagnostic wall, sleeves rolled, dark hair tied back, and already starting to loosen at the temple. She had a thin line of fatigue under each eye and the controlled anger of someone whose work was being strangled by people who would never have to say the names of the dead. You took your time, she said. I had a fleet arrive over my head, and I have a ward that is running short on binding agents, saline, and purifier stock. So I suppose we are both having a complicated morning. Her voice never rose. That was one of the things Elias trusted most about her. When other people panicked, Mara became clearer. She walked him toward a side station and brought up a patient curve. It isn't one disease. That would be easier. We have dehydration spikes, gut failures from dirty water exposure, and immune crashes in the oldest blocks where the circulation units are underperforming. I can hold the line for a little while if supply opens tonight. It won't. She studied his face for half a second, saw the answer, and nodded once. Then I need the truth, not the version the public board is feeding me. He gave it to her in full. The fleet, the order from Earth, and the rule he had been handed like a collar around the throat. Mara listened without interrupting. When he finished, she crossed her arms and glanced through the ward glass toward the families outside. So they want you angry, she said. Yes. They want one clean image of a human commander firing at a peacekeeping ship. Yes, they want to say the colony was unstable, the commander escalated, and intervention became necessary. Yes, she exhaled slowly, though we do not give them that image. He looked at her. You said you command defense. I command what is left of health. If they're going to squeeze this place until it looks unfit to govern itself, then yes, Elias, that is a we. A nurse approached, asked Mara for authorization on a purifier reallocation, and moved on again. The interruption did not weaken the moment. It clarified it. This was what mattered now. Not the fleet as symbol, but the people, the filters, and the hours still left. Mara turned back to the board. There is something else. She brought up a second display. Water quality fluctuation charts pulsed over a map of the southern tier. I thought this was simple overload at first. It isn't. The contamination spikes are two-patterned. Sector clusters go dirty, then normalize, then another cluster fails. If the purification towers were collapsing from age, the spread would be uglier. This looks managed. Managed from inside, or remotely through an access layer somebody should not have. Elias felt the first hard knot of certainty tighten behind his ribs. This was not just a fleet over the colony. Someone had started softening the ground before the fleet arrived. He left the hospital with a tighter jaw and a clearer next objective. By the time he reached the command gallery again, the public channels were full of edited summaries from the Border Stability Commission, all describing Astorvale as a transport colony suffering from governance fatigue, supply unreliability, and growing civilian unrest under strained local management. None of it was fully false. That was why it worked. Selmeric's name surfaced in one of the metadata trails, buried inside a dissemination package tied to a commercial media syndicate. Elias knew the name. Merrick was not a soldier. He specialized in narrative stabilization, a phrase that sounded harmless until you noticed how often people lost their homes after he touched a story. Soren watched the same feed and shook his head. They had the language ready before the ships arrived. Because the ships are only one arm, Elias said. He gave 3 orders in quick succession. Internal security logs were to be mirrored to offline storage every 10 minutes. Weapons teams would remain under sealed defensive protocols with no provocative movement, and engineering teams would begin a silent audit of the colony's water and circulation networks under medical priority cover. Soren looked at him. Do you think we can actually prove sabotage before the shortages break us? Elias answered with the truth. I think proof is the only thing that keeps this from becoming a template. Late that cycle, the ship from Cinder Verge finally appeared on local approach. The grain tender had ridden the corridor for 16 hours longer than planned, and its captain sounded tired, angry, and ashamed. We have your food, he told Dock Control. Task Group Sigma is denying terminal lock until reclassification review clears. On what basis? Soren asked over open channel. On the basis that apparently hunger is now a legal category. Vin's command office transmitted a formal denial packet 2 minutes later. The justification ran 6 pages. The effect was simple. Entry withheld. In the southern tier, people watched the grain tender hanging in view beyond the shield envelope and understood, all at once, what the fleet had come to do. Astorvale did not erupt immediately. It sagged, and that was worse. Men and women who had held ugly mining contracts, reactor leaks, hull breaches, and labor stoppages now stood at ration points with silent faces and watched their children measure portions with careful hands. Workers coming off shift were told to report to food lines instead of recreation. Hydroponics crews started arguing with security over access allocations, and Water Exchange 9 reported another fight before dawn. Through it all, Elias kept his units visible but still. If guns appeared too early, fear would do the rest for his enemies. The second day of the blockade began with a proposal. Brigadier Kaler Vin requested a private security conference aboard his command ship. Elias refused. Vin replied by offering a face-to-face in neutral dock orbit under monitored conditions. Elias refused again. The third message came in written form. If Astorvale transferred temporary control of orbital traffic freight arbitration, and external port security to Task Group Sigma for 72 hours. The fleet would authorize immediate release of delayed grain and medical shipments. Internal colony policing could remain in local hands pending review. The terms were written to look generous. Soren read them twice and snorted. He wants the throat and promises to leave us the teeth. He wants the port, Elias said. Once he has the port, he has the story. Mara arrived an hour later from the Southern Hospital and read the proposal in silence. Then she asked, "If you sign this, what happens on the public record?" Elias Ward accepts outside stabilization measures after civil degradation indicators cross threshold. And in plain language, I admit the colony cannot manage itself. She nodded. Then people like Sel Merrick get to say they saved us from ourselves. He looked at her. She looked worse than yesterday. Not dramatic, not broken, just visibly emptied by work. How bad, he asked. Bad enough that I stopped saying and started saying went to my senior staff. If clean supply does not arrive soon, we will lose people who should not die on a settled colony. He said nothing. Mara's mouth tightened. I know what you're thinking. I know you cannot hand them the port. I also know that ethics become very expensive when dehydration starts moving through family blocks. I know. She stepped closer and lowered her voice. Then do not talk to me like I am made of principle and not blood. I am asking for reality. Can you give me what I need without giving him what he wants? That is what I am working on. Work faster. He almost smiled. Almost. Instead, he said, stay with me after shift. She studied him for a moment, reading whether that was personal or strategic. With Elias, it was often both and neither. For what? I want you in the engineering audit room when they open the water net. That bad? Maybe. Then yes. The audit room sat deep in Infrastructure Core 2, where the colony's older systems still relied on hardware simple enough to survive power instability and old enough to resent being inspected. Mara arrived with a medtech team and a box of quick rations she forgot to eat while Chief Engineer Dallin Furs opened the purifier logs under offline conditions, and Elias, Soren, and 2 counter-intrusion specialists watched. At first it looked like ordinary strain. Load surges, pump throttling, tower delays. Then Furs froze the display and enlarged a permissions cascade. There, he said. What am I looking at? Mara asked. Not failure. Command override. He ran the trace deeper. A hidden supervisory layer had been inserted into the purifier network months earlier during a certified logistics efficiency patch pushed through inter-colony systems. The layer could not permanently shut purification down without tripping alarms, but it could cycle stress points, alter output priority, and redirect clean flow long enough to poison specific neighborhoods by neglect. Mara stared at the display. Someone has been making districts sick on purpose. Looks that way, Furs said. Soren pointed to the embedded signature chain. Where does it lead? For Schwalot. Not outside first. It routes through internal logistics authority. Silence tightened around the room. Elias spoke without emotion. How many people had access to approve this patch? Furs brought up the authorization tree. Names scrolled down. Most were old. Most were routine. One was current. Lena Torvik, Logistics Synchronization Chief. Soden Mater. No. Elias knew Lena. Everyone did. She had managed berth timing, warehouse rotation, and corridor sequencing for nearly 3 years. Efficient. Hard to like. Harder to replace. She kept ships moving in windows no one else could hold in their head. If she wanted to choke a colony without setting off early alarms, she could do it. Mara looked at Elias. If she is part of this, then the fleet knew exactly what shape the pressure would take before they arrived. They arrived because the shape was ready, Elias said. He shut down the room and gave new orders. Torvik was not to be arrested yet. Not that early, and not that visibly. If she knew they were onto her, whoever sat behind her would burn every trace still left in the system. Instead, Elias let the colony keep moving while he narrowed the board. That night, unrest finally broke into the open. Water Exchange 9 erupted again when a delivery was cut in half. 2 distribution officers were injured, and security teams went in unarmed and barely held the line while public boards lit up with edited footage that made it appear as though Astorvale security had beaten civilians while trying to protect supply privilege. Sel Merrick's fingerprints were all over the spin. An hour later, Kaylor Vin sent another message. Commander Ward, this deterioration is regrettable. My previous offer remains open. Transfer port authority and outside aid begins immediately. Elias answered in text this time. Astorvale remains under lawful local control. Civil order will be maintained by Colony. Authority. Delayed cargo release is your responsibility. Vin replied almost at once. If you insist on framing relief as coercion, Commander, you may soon discover that rhetoric does not refill empty shelves. Elias read it once and deleted the channel. On the fourth day, the colony started smelling different. Anyone who had lived long enough on a station or Moon City knew the scent of systems under strain. Clean air had a bland certainty to it, but stressed air tasted metallic, drier, thinner, as if the walls had begun paying more attention than the machines. Astorvale was not failing yet, but it was thinking about it. Mara sent him casualty estimates in 6-hour increments. Elias sent her armored escorts for medical convoys that officially did not need protection. Neither of them mentioned the other in public channels. In the command gallery, Soren tracked every freighter held beyond clearance range. 2 from Cinderverge, 1 from Harrow Chain, 1 med carrier from Earthline, 1 civilian mixed cargo from Belmarch. Belmarch, Elias said. They do not usually service us. No, which means either they got rerouted here, or somebody wanted a haul in place that we would not recognize. Elias looked up. Tag it. They pulled the Belmarch Freighters registry. The ship listed civilian equipment, adhesive polymers, insulation panels, low-tier med packs, and hygiene modules. Boarding cargo. Too boring. Elias had it marked for enhanced passive scan if it ever made dock. Until then, it stayed where Vin kept it, just far enough out that civilians could see it and hate the delay. That evening, Mara came to his office without sending notice first. Elias was alone, eating a ration pack he had forgotten to open for 2 hours. You still do that, she said. He looked at the packet in his hand. Do what? Treat food like paperwork. It offends you every time. It should. She closed the door behind her and dropped a small data slate on his desk. Ward analysis from Residential South. The contamination clusters align with distribution routes, not population density. Whoever built the sabotage pattern wanted panic, not maximum body count. Not yet. He stood and pulled up the data. She was right. The distribution map created anger before mortality, arguments before funerals, and local breakdown before open collapse. They want public collapse first, he said. Bodies second. Because collapse is easier. To moralize. He looked at her, then at the slate again. You came here just to hand me this. I came because you haven't slept. And because if I stayed in that hospital another hour without saying something to someone who understands what this is, I was going to start breaking furniture. That almost earned a laugh. Not quite. She moved closer to the window and looked out over the interdock lights. My father used to say border systems never begin by killing you. They begin by teaching you how little oxygen dignity gets. Elias remembered the man. Engineer. Loud. Kind. Dead 11 years. He was wrong, Elias said quietly. Mara turned. About what? Dignity lasts longer than they think. For the first time in days, some of the weight in her face shifted. She crossed her arms, not defensively, but to hold herself steady. You always say things like that at the worst possible time. I say them when you look like you need to hear them. She studied him for a long moment. That is either thoughtful or dangerously observant. Both. She shook her head, but there was warmth under it. That was all either of them could afford. Then she said, do not die trying to keep your moral geometry perfect, Elias. It is not moral geometry. It is strategic. Strategic people still bleed. He stepped closer, close enough to smell antiseptic on her sleeves. So do doctors. The silence that followed was not awkward. It was the kind that comes when two adults know exactly what exists between them and exactly why it cannot be allowed to take the room away from the crisis outside it. Mara touched the edge of his desk, then let her hand fall. Finding my shipments. I will. You had better. She left before the moment became larger than either of them could carry. On the fifth day, Elias made his first offensive move. He chose the Belmarsh freighter because by then he needed proof, not just suspicion. A narrow maintenance fault was staged along dock spine 2, forcing a minor realignment in cargo priority requests. And at the same time, Elias had a civilian union supervisor file an emergency appeal for sanitation polymer stocks needed in the southern housing ring. The Belmarsh ship fit the category, and VIN staff approved a limited transfer to prove they were not blocking essential goods. The freighter docked at Bay 12 under peacekeeping watch. Elias had already placed a customs team, an engineering sweep crew, and 2 intelligence officers inside the inspection corridor. The cargo manifest was false. Not dramatically, not in a way that would look cinematic to anyone who had never worked a port. It was false in the quiet way real smuggling and covert operations were false. Seals that matched but did not age correctly. Pallet weights off by narrow margins. Hygiene modules packed around hard cases of communications hardware. Relief kit wrappers surrounding data cores. One of the intelligence officers opened the first hard case and looked at Elias. This is not trade support. Inside were prepared media bundles, colony risk profiles, editable crisis timelines, and public order templates already written for at least 9 human settlements, including Astorvale. Each package mapped a different route from supply disruption to legal supervision. Some ended with trade custody, some with disarmament, and some with emergency governance transfer. All began with human instability. Sel Merrick's signature architecture threaded through the packet tree like a spider under paint. Soren went cold beside him. They were not just preparing to manage this. They were preparing to narrate it in bulk. Elias stared at the files. This was always a rollout. One of the templates included Astorvale by name. It described the likely timeline of increasing protest, water failures, food unrest, failed local command judgment, and eventual transfer of orbital control to a temporary external authority. There were optional branches for medical collapse and commander misconduct. They had already written the colony's future. Elias made copies, sealed the original cache, and ordered the freight bay returned to apparent routine. If Vin realized the Belmarsh ship had been opened properly, he would pull back and shift methods. Instead, Elias let Sigma believe its prop ship had passed inspection. Hours later, the old Earth relay cracked alive again, weaker than before. Frontier Command came through in fragments. Not isolated, similar pressure patterns across line. No fleet movement possible without trigger. If you have proof of manufacturer instability, hold it until transmission survivability improves. Do not feed them the first strike. Repeat. Then static. Soren threw the headset onto the table. What good is proof if we die before anybody sees it? Elias did not answer right away. The truth was brutal. Proof without survival was history. Survival without proof was surrender dressed as patience. He needed both. That same cycle, Kaler Vin escalated. Task Group Sigma announced temporary boarding authority for all external cargo touching Astorvale, and they began field inspections within visual range of civilian traffic, while one of the Cinder Verge grain tenders was forced into partial venting after a fabricated sensor dispute. The cargo spoiled before transfer could be resolved. The public saw food lost in open space while peacekeeping ships hovered nearby and claimed procedure. Then Vin sent down a second offer. 48 hours. Port control transfer. Joint security arrangement. Emergency ration release. Elias declined again. The Colony Council requested a direct session with him. He met them in a cramped chamber beneath Administrative Ring 2, where the air always felt too warm and the chairs were designed to make everyone look more important than they were. 7 council members attended in person, 3 by local relay. None smiled. Councilor von Arx spoke first. Commander, people are frightened. You are refusing terms that would restore supply. Those terms do not restore supply, Elias said. They transfer control. They transfer temporary control. Temporary arrangements have a long history of outliving their names. Another counselor leaned forward. With respect, we are not discussing history. We are discussing children, workers, clinics, and families without food. Elias met the man's eyes. And if I hand orbit to Sigma, you will still have those families. Only then every critical route in and out of this colony will be filtered through an outside force that arrived here with a crisis narrative already drafted. That got their attention. Von Ark frowned. What are you saying? I am saying this shortage was prepared. I am saying our water failures were not natural. I am saying this fleet came to a stage that had already been built. You can prove that. Not yet to a standard safe enough to release. The chamber tightened at those words. Not yet. For civilians under pressure, not yet sounded too much like never. Ark spoke again, quieter this time. Then understand our position. If you are right, we need your resolve. If you are wrong, your pride may kill this colony. Elias stood up. If I am wrong, you may remove me after we survive. If I am right, signing Vin's terms will teach the border how to take human colonies without ever admitting conquest. He left before anyone could ask him for certainty he did not have. By the sixth day, the southern tier broke harder. A filter cascade failed through 4 residential blocks. Mara's hospitals overflowed, water convoys became security operations, and a crowd surrounded distribution gate 11 and refused to disperse until crates were opened in front of them. Someone threw a tool at a security drone. The drone did not respond. That was lucky. If it had fired, even on crowd control setting, Selmeric would have had his footage. Elias rode out to the gate personally with a minimal escort. People parted when they saw him, not out of fear, but because colonies trained citizens to notice when command stepped into the breach without armored theater. He climbed onto a supply loader and looked out over the crowd. Men in work coveralls, women holding ration tags, elderly residents who had survived relocation from older Earth belts. Teenagers angry enough to believe anger could manufacture food. He did not give them a speech. He simply said, Gate 11 opens in 19 minutes. We are resequencing stock. No one here gets more by breaking the system before the stock hits the floor. You know me. I do not make false promises. Supply is tight. Water is under attack. We are fixing both. You hold the line with me, and everyone behind this gate gets a share. You break it, and the weakest families lose first. Decide what kind of colony you are. No cheering followed. No miracle. But the crowd thinned just enough for the gate teams to work. That mattered more. When he returned to command, the engineering team had worse news. The sabotage patterns extended into storage routing and traffic timing. Not enough to crash the colony outright, but enough to turn ordinary strain into cascading failure. Someone inside logistics had not just opened doors. They had tuned the colony for humiliation. Elias sat with the access trails until one name remained impossible to avoid. Lena Torvik. He had her picked up quietly from Synchronization Office 4 at shift change. No public arrest. No spectacle. Soren and 2 internal security officers brought her to an interview room under maintenance pretext, and she came in annoyed, not frightened. That changed when Elias placed the purifier logs, freight manipulation traces, and Bell March data fragments in front of her. 6 seconds, Lena said nothing. Then she laughed once. It was not bravado. It was relief. I wonder how long it would take you, she said. Soren moved like he wanted to put his fist through the table. Elias stopped him with one look. You compromised colony infrastructure, Elias said. You diverted essential routing. You enabled outside coercion under active population stress. Explain yourself. Lena leaned back. She was in her 40s, pale from years under artificial light, with the kind of face long-term logistics people got when their lives were spent more with schedules than with mirrors. You think I betrayed the colony, she said. I think I studied the math. What math? The math of survival. Earth cannot hold the border forever. Human colonies like this one keep pretending stubbornness is sovereignty. It isn't. It is delay. The larger systems already decide what reaches us, what powers us, what recognizes our claims, what protects our lanes. You call dependence an insult. I call it a fact. You made civilians sick to prove a theory. I made stress visible before collapse became total. Better supervised stability than glorious ruin. Mara would have hit her. Elias did not. You sold out your own people. I prevented something worse. Which is? Lena met his gaze. The war you are still arrogant enough to think you can avoid on your own terms. That was the first time Elias felt the second layer beneath Sigma's orbit with true certainty. This was not just opportunism. There was doctrine behind it. He pressed harder. Names. Contact. Payment trails. Relay routes. At first she gave him nothing. Then he showed her the Bell March package with a 9-colony rollout tree. Something in her expression shifted. Not guilt. Not exactly. More like insult. They move that fast, she said. You did not know? I knew Astorvale was the test. The word hung in the room like poison. Elias let her keep talking. Lena had worked through intermediaries, border policy analysts, trade risk liaisons, and quiet consultants tied to the Border Stability Commission. She believed she was helping steer Astorvale into a controlled dependency status that would spare it from being crushed later in open war. Instead, she had helped prepare tools for a wider fracture campaign against multiple human colonies. You were never a partner, Elias said. You were an opening. Lena looked away. That, more than anything, told him she finally understood. He left the room and found Mara in the corridor outside. She had come from South Tier again, another 12-hour cycle, maybe more. Her hands were clean, but rough from sanitizer and too little rest. Was it her, she asked. Yes. She closed her eyes once. I knew it. I still hate hearing it. There is more. He told her about the rollout packages, the 9-colony scenarios, and the supervision templates. When he finished, Mara leaned against the wall and stared at the floor for a moment. So this is bigger than supply. It was always bigger than supply. And we are still alone. Not alone. Just first. She looked up at him. That was one of the few times in the whole crisis he let the harder truth show on his face. Mara saw it immediately. Then she stepped in and hugged him. Not dramatically. Not for long. Just a tired, fierce, adult moment in a corridor that smelled like warm circuitry and recycled air. Elias did not move at first. Then his hand settled at the middle of her back. When she pulled away, she said, You are allowed to look tired for 3 seconds. Then I need my commander back. He gave her one of the smallest smiles she had ever seen from him. 3 seconds is expensive. Then spend them wisely. On the 7th day, Earth got a message through in full. Not through official border relays, but through an old freight repeater buried in a maintenance channel Sigma had apparently judged too obsolete to matter. The packet came from Frontier Command and included a strategic overlay. Astorvale was not alone. 3 human colonies along adjacent border arcs had seen similar pressure signatures in recent months. Trade stalls, legal reviews, sanitation anomalies, and supply ranking downgrades had all appeared before. None had escalated this far because none had resisted at the point of orbital transfer. One had already accepted temporary stabilization and never fully regained its docks. Another had surrendered external inspections and lost effective customs control in 4 days. A third had seen its local defense force disarmed after a riot that later turned out to be seeded by manipulated ration data. Under the overlay sat a line from command. If Astorvale falls under this model, it becomes precedent. That was the war. Not missiles. First. Precedent first. 2 hours later, new contacts appeared at the edge of the system. Not reinforcements from Earth. Worse. A heavier formation entered deep approach under the authority seal of Admiral Sarek Thorne. Not enough ships to start a large campaign, but enough to end one colony's illusions. The formation held outside direct orbital insertion range and waited. Kaler Vin sent a simple notice. Task Group Sigma welcomes the oversight presence of sector security fleet elements during this ongoing stabilization review. Translation. You are now arguing with the tip of a blade while the hilt arrived behind it. Soren stared at the plot. He brought in the bigger stick before he even finished the paperwork. He was always going to, Elias said. Then why keep pretending he wants compliance? Because compliance is cleaner than assault. Cleaner for records. Cleaner for markets. Cleaner for every state that wants human colonies reduced without calling it reduction. Mara came to command half an hour later with fresh numbers. She did not ask permission to enter anymore. South Tier has 20 hours on critical purifier support, she said. Lesson blocks 9 and 10. If we cannot restore clean flow, I start triage categories I do not want to say out loud. Elias absorbed the numbers in silence. There is more, she said. The public board rumor that Earth has abandoned us is spreading again. Someone is pushing fake transport maps into the local nets. They show our relief corridor rerouted permanently away from Astorvale. Said Marik, or one of his disciples. Does it matter? No. She set her data slate down. Then tell me what you're going to do. Elias turned to the main display and enlarged the interior logistics map. The sabotage flows. The remaining clean reserves. The shielded maintenance tunnels. The emergency stores hidden beneath defense inventory. The places he had not touched because they were his last margin if assault came. He looked at Mara. How long can you hold Residential South if I open reserve stock publicly? Her eyes narrowed. Publicly, if I do it quietly, the people who need to see resolve will think the colony is still starving. If I do it publicly, we calm the district and expose the reserve pattern to anyone watching logistics. Yes, Mara understood immediately. Then once it is exposed, Sigma or the internal network behind Lena can hit. The reserve route. Yes. Then you're trading your last concealed stock line for time. Yes. She inhaled slowly. Do it. Soren looked between them. That is our emergency war buffer. Mara answered before Elias could. Then maybe it is time we start acting like the war did not ask our permission. Elias gave the order. Armored utility haulers rolled into Residential South under open guard, not with heavy weapons bristling, but with med teams, water canisters, nutrient packs, and purifier cores loaded in plain sight. Elias rode with the first convoy. Mara rode with the second. Civilians lined the route and watched the colony spend what it had hidden. Some cried. Some shouted thanks. Some shouted that it had taken too long. All of them understood something Vin had not calculated correctly. Astorvale still answered its own hunger. That mattered. The reserve release stabilized South Tier for the day. It also did exactly what Elias feared. 3 hours later, one of the exposed route junctions suffered a systems cut, another warehouse lock failed under false clearance, and a reserve transfer drone vanished between decks. The sabotage network had woken up fully. That gave Elias what he needed. Pattern velocity. With reserves moving, the hidden access traces grew louder. Chief Engineer Dallin Furs and the counter-intrusion team finally mapped enough of the colony's compromised logistics web to reveal the planned endgame. The Border Stability Commission had already drafted a legal transition file reclassifying Astorvale as a transitional corridor under supervised administration. The trigger conditions included sustained unrest, supply insecurity, compromised local command judgment, and inability to maintain essential civilian services. Every one of those conditions had been cultivated. Elias stared at the file in hard silence. They wrote the diagnosis before we had the symptoms, Soren said. Because they planned the symptoms, Mara replied. A second document was worse. It proposed temporary rights audits across nearby human settlements once Astorvale's case established regional pattern. A template, a machine, a doctrine. Elias looked around the room at Soren, Mara, Furs, and a handful of people who now knew the full scale of what they faced. This does not leave local channels. Not yet. Soren flared. Not yet again. We release too soon. Sigma calls it forged internal desperation. Or worse, they cut the relay before it clears trusted net, and we lose both evidence and surprise. So what? Dovedo? Furs asked. Elias pointed to a decommissioned transport line on the colony map. We use something older than their assumptions. The old freight tug, St. Elmo, had been half retired for 6 years. It hauled scrap and structural mass when newer systems were busy. Its hull was ugly, patched, and unimportant, which made it perfect. Under cover of reserve redistribution and repair traffic, Elias loaded the evidence cache into the tug's dead navigation compartment. A civilian crew with old Earth contracts agreed to fly it. They knew exactly what they were carrying in spirit, if not in detail. If St. Elmo cleared the orbital web and jumped the evidence to an open relay lattice beyond Sigma's preferred filter band, The whole border would see what Astorvale had become. If it failed, Elias would likely be fighting blind within a day. Before launch, he found Mara alone in the port corridor beside the loading bay. The tug's old hull lights washed her face in pale amber. "You came to say goodbye to a ship?" he asked. "I came to say goodbye to whatever remains of the illusion that this ends quietly." He stood beside her and looked at St. Elmo. "That illusion ended days ago. Not for me." She turned to him. "For me, it ends when I watch you send our best chance out through a blockade, while knowing what happens if they catch it." He kept his hands at his sides. "If they catch it, we move to the next shape." That is a very commander sentence. It is also true. Her voice softened. "I know." A crew whistle sounded from the tug hatch. Mara stepped closer. "If this goes bad, if Thorn pushes before the data clears, what do you do?" "I hold the colony. Even if holding it means becoming the image they want." "No. If I become the image they want, we lose more than this moon." She studied him like she was trying to memorize the exact balance between duty and exhaustion in his face. Then she kissed him. It was brief. Not hesitant, not reckless. A decision, like everything else either of them still owned. When she pulled back, she did not apologize. That was for later, in case later gets delayed. His voice came out rougher than usual. "That sounds like you. I take what timing allows. Then survive. Long enough to be difficult again. I plan to." St. Elmo launched 5 minutes later. For 16 minutes, it looked like the gamble might work. The tug drifted out under routine clearance tone, rolled around a cluster of ballast barges, and angled toward a decaying customs relay no modern task group should have cared about. Then Sigma moved. Not openly. Not with cannon fire. 2 inspection corvettes broke pattern and ordered St. Elmo to halt for verification under expanded stabilization authority. The tug did not halt. Kaler Vin himself appeared on a priority channel. "Commander Ward, your cargo tug is attempting unauthorized flight under active review conditions. Order it to stand down. It is a civilian transport leaving local dock under registered maintenance transfer. It is carrying unreviewed data and possibly destabilizing material." "How did you know that?" A tiny pause. That was answer enough. Vin recovered quickly. "I'm advising you not to deepen this situation." Elias looked at the tactical plot. St. Elmo was still moving. The corvettes were gaining. "If you board that tug," Elias said, "you prove your review is about more than food." Vin's voice cooled by a degree. "If I do not board it, Commander, you prove that human local command is weaponizing civil transport." There was again. The trap wrapped both ways. Elias did not answer. Instead, he signaled St. Elmo through a burst channel and switched their route manually through an obsolete drift corridor built for, or haulers too clumsy for modern lanes. The maneuver was ugly, dangerous, and exactly the sort of thing Sigma would hesitate to mimic in close quarters for fear of collision. St. Elmo scraped a dead relay tower by less than a ship's length, spun on thruster burst, and vanished in a sensor shadow long enough to reach the outer lattice. Then Sigma jammed the local board so hard half the gallery lights flickered. Soren shouted over the noise. "Did it make it?" "We won't know for 8 minutes. 8 minutes is a long time. Then use it." Elias turned the command floor into motion. Defense teams redistributed under compartmentalized control, no unit knowing more than its immediate route and fallback. Internal locks shifted from centralized to zone authority, so another Lena Torvik could not open the whole body of the colony at once. Civilian volunteer crews were reassigned to fire breaks, med corridors, and emergency lift. Control. Mara got full priority on power and transport, even over weapon support, until direct assault began. Then Kaler Vin crossed another line. Special security teams requested landing rights at Port Spine 1 to secure humanitarian stock from local unrest. Elias denied the request. The teams descended anyway. They came in fast shuttles with lightly armored hulls and neutral markings, not a military invasion force, but a seizure package dressed as protective custody. Elias saw the move for what it was. If Sigma planted outside security personnel inside the port before the evidence package cleared, then whatever happened next could be described as joint control gone wrong rather than coercive entry. He opened a direct channel to Vin. You are attempting unauthorized insertion into colony space. I am protecting humanitarian assets. You were denied. You are under review. Elias ended the channel and issued the narrowest armed order of his life. No fire unless they breach sealed civilian port volume. Disable only if penetrations continue after 3 warnings. All visuals recorded. All channels mirrored. The first Sigma shuttle ignored the warnings and crossed the inner shield lip. Elias watched the timer in his own head rather than the one on the wall. If he fired too early, Vin got his picture. If he fired too late, Vin got his port. The shuttle doors began to unfold. Now, Elias said, defense emitters struck the lead shuttle's maneuver array. Not the cockpit, not the life support ring, the maneuver array. The shuttle slewed sideways, lost attitude control, and slammed into an outer docking frame instead of the central bay. The second shuttle pulled back instantly. The third kept coming. Astor Vale clipped that 1-2 harder, enough to spin it clear and force emergency retreat. Across public channels, Sigma began broadcasting that local forces had opened fire on humanitarian stabilization teams. But the whole exchange had been recorded from port cameras, worker cams, tug maintenance feeds, and civilian watch clusters Elias had seeded specifically for this moment. The footage showed 3 warnings, denial of landing, breach anyway, then controlled defensive fire. It was not enough to win. It was enough to resist the lie. Mara's voice came through local command from South Tier. Casualty check from port, minor industrial injuries. No mass casualty. Good, because I am busy enough. He could hear background noise behind her. Crowded wards, metal wheels, human effort. Then she added, lower, stay precise. I intend to. The 8 minutes expired. St. Elmo's transmission burst hit the open relay lattice. Not just to Earth, but to trade exchanges, independent freight unions, legal monitors, border observers, and every colonial forum still suspicious enough to read raw evidence before polished summaries arrived. The cache spread faster than Sigma could sweat it down. Purifier sabotage logs, pre-written instability packages, transition templates, traffic manipulation chains, internal policy drafts discussing human settlements as corridor liabilities best managed through stage dependence. Across the gallery, secondary boards began lighting with outside queries, stunned packet pulls, and mirrored captures. Someone on the open net had already copied everything twice. Soren let out a breath like he had been underwater for a week. They got it. Elias did not celebrate. Now Van gets desperate. He was right. Within the hour, Admiral Sarek Thorne moved his heavier ships closer and issued a system notice placing the immediate orbital zone under temporary security hazard review. That was a large phrase for a simple threat. Compliance now, or the larger fleet enters the room. At the same time, internal alarms lit across Dock Spine 4, then Cargo Ring 2, then Water Relay South. Not random. Coordinated. Someone still inside the colony was executing last phase disruption. Lena had already been contained, which meant her network had backups. Elias split the problem 3 ways. Soren took counter-sabotage teams to Cargo Ring 2. Furs moved with engineering to Water Relay South. Elias himself took a rapid security unit toward Dock Spine 4, where port control anchored half the colony's remaining leverage. The corridor fighting there was ugly and close. Not a battlefield in the grand heroic sense. A port war. Forklifts abandoned crosswise. Maintenance sparks raining from ruptured panels. Security shutters half closed. Civilian stevedores hauling crates in a makeshift cover, because if the spine fell, the colony's external throat went with it. The infiltrators were not uniformed Sigma troops. They were contract security and false technical personnel prepositioned through freight channels. That made the whole thing filthier. Elias fought the way he commanded. Direct. Economical. No guastimotion. No performance. He dropped one intruder with a stun round at close range, drove another behind a cargo frame, and used the pause to get a team into the port lock controls before the attackers could cycle the bay open for a forced rescue entry. From Sigma, by the time Dock Spine 4 was secure, 3 of his people were down, 2 civilians were wounded, and the attackers had almost succeeded in opening a corridor Vin could have used to justify full insertion. Mara reported from South Tier that sabotage teams had tried to cut medical transit lifts as well. Hospital orderlies and maintenance crews had physically held one lift shaft against an override team until local security arrived. Your civilians are fighting like they know what this means, Elias said. They do know, Mara replied. That is the point. At the edge of the system, Sarek Thorne sent his ultimatum. Astervale would surrender external security coordination and accept supervised humanitarian administration, or sector fleet elements would enforce protective order under regional authority. Elias read the message in full. Then he noticed something smaller moving under the wave. Secondary network chatter from border exchanges. Trade unions suspending corridor cooperation with any peacekeeping group tied to cargo manipulation. Independent legal monitors requesting emergency review of Border Stability Commission authority. Civilian freight captains broadcasting Astervale footage with angry commentary of the sort no polished policy office could fully contain. The evidence had not won the war, but it had broken the clean skin around the lie. Kaler Vin requested one final direct channel. Elias accepted it. Vin's face still looked composed, but the strain was there now around the mouth. You have turned a manageable intervention into a regional crisis. Elias answered. You staged a colony and got angry when it refused the script. You are indulging in rhetoric while your civilians starve. My civilians starve because you delayed cargo. Vin's expression hardened. This sends one of 2 ways. You yield port coordination and preserve what remains, or fleet security enters under Thorne's authority and your local command becomes irrelevant. Elias leaned slightly toward the screen. If Thorne enters after your ships breached port denial, after your teams landed without authorization, after your network altered our water system and freight timing, he enters as conquest wrapped in procedure. Vin almost smiled. Only if anyone still believes your data. They already copied it. That landed. For the first time, Kaler Vin looked not superior, but cornered. Then he said, you still lose. Elias thought of the hospital wards, the ration lines, the old workers holding Gate 11, the St. Elmo scraping a dead relay tower, and Mara in the loading corridor refusing false comfort. Maybe Vin was right in a narrow way. Maybe Astervale could not leave this unchanged. Maybe some losses were already written into the walls. But loss was not the same thing as surrender. He said, not today. The channel closed. The final confrontation began with movement in low orbit. Sarek Thorne pushed 3 heavy hulls down toward the inner approach while Sigma tightened around the port spines. Publicly, they announced a protective seizure of humanitarian infrastructure. Privately, every officer in the system knew it was the moment when coercion either turned into occupation or recoiled. Elias issued his last wide order to the colony. All units, hold the defensive law. Do not chase outside assigned envelope. Protect civilian zones, power routing, hospitals, and port control. Record everything. Let them be the first clear act. Those words went farther than he intended. Civilians heard them. Dock crews heard them. Med teams heard them. Engineers heard them. They heard that their commander understood the true battlefield. Not just steel. Meaning, Sigma tried the port again, this time with more force and less pretense. Boarding craft descended under escort while remote jamming hit the colony's outer sensor net. Astervale responded with layered defense, not broad salvos. Point emitter strikes. Denial. Traffic lattice disruption. Industrial drones repurposed into shield clutter. Civilian tug pilots dragging dead mass into approach lines to spoil clean vectors. It was chaotic, improvised, and brilliant in a way only a living colony under threat could be. At Port Spine 1, a Sigma shuttle carrying emergency seizure personnel clipped a service gantry after its guidance feed, was confused by tug interference. The shuttle spun, overcorrected, and struck the exterior shell of a rescue cutter moored beside a civilian evacuation stack. The impact was captured from 14 angles. When Sigma personnel opened fire to secure the wreck area, they hit the rescue cutter. Inside that cutter were med crews. Not soldiers, med crews. The footage went public before Venn could bury it. All the careful language broke at once. Even the Border Stability Commission could not call that stabilizing conduct. In the hospital network, Mara was treating fresh port casualties when the clip hit the ward screens. Patients saw it. Nurses saw it. Port workers saw their own people fired on by the very force claiming humanitarian authority. Something changed then. Across Astorvale, fear did not vanish. It hardened. Elias felt it in the command flow. Civilians stopped asking whether he would hold. They started asking where they were needed. Cargo techs became repair runners. Retired miners manned seal doors. Hydroponics teams rerouted moisture salvage to med wards without waiting for paperwork. Union loaders volunteered lift shafts no sane person wanted to climb under fire. This was not glorious. It was human. That was stronger. Soren came back to command with blood on one sleeve that was not his and a grin so exhausted it barely counted. Cargo Ring 2 is ours. We lost 2 bays, kept the route. Water. Furs stabilized South Relay with half a team and 3 miracles. Fleet status. Soren brought the plot up. Thorn is holding at the threshold. He is not advancing the heavies all the way. Why? Because the net is on fire, meaning the open networks, the trade exchanges, the border observers, the copied evidence, the med cutter footage, the docking breach recordings. The whole ugly progression was now moving faster than any official summary. Thorn could still force the issue, but now he would do it under light, not shadow. That did not save Astorvale by itself. Power flickered in 3 districts. One port spine burned. Residential South lost another water block. Casualty tables grew. Lives ended that should have gone on for decades. Victory, if it came, would not be clean enough to console anyone with a working conscience. Elias crossed from command to the outer observation tier just once during the height of the fighting. The shielded glass looked over the port arc, where sparks, shuttle trails, and emergency strobes stitched bright damage into the dark. Mara met him there by accident or design. It no longer mattered. She had blood on her collar, and someone else's soot on one cheek. How bad, she asked. He gave her the numbers he had. She gave him hers. Neither tried to soften them. Then Mara looked out through the glass and said, I used to think dignity was what you had before the crisis. Elias turned to her. What do you think now? I think it is what stays after everything else gets priced. He reached for her hand. Just once. Just there. She held it for 3 breaths. Then both of them went back to work. The next 6 hours. Decided Astorvale. Sarek Thorn kept pressing at the legal edge, but every additional move now generated more scrutiny, more copying, more outside anger, and more trade hesitation from systems that did not love humanity but loved unstable precedent even less. Kaler Venn lost narrative control first. That mattered more than he had planned for. Selmeric's prepared story could no longer absorb the raw footage and leaked templates racing through every net that distrusted official summaries. Inside the colony, the last sabotage cells were rooted out. 2 were found inside waste processing coveralls, 1 inside auxiliary freight arbitration, and another in a relay closet beneath Civic Hall. None had expected Astorvale to keep enough internal cohesion to make their timing fail. That was Lena Torvik's final mistake as well. She had believed human communities under pressure would choose submission if it came dressed as rescue and delay if it came dressed as principle. She had not calculated attachment, not sentimentality. Attachment to each other, to routine, to the right to answer their own emergencies, to the simple fact that when outsiders script your weakness, resistance becomes practical before it becomes symbolic. By local dawn cycle, Sigma's boarding attempts had failed. Poor control remained in colony hands. The hospital corridors were still functioning. Water South still ran, weak but clean. The old freight line through St. Elmo's relay corridor opened just wide enough for 2 delayed relief ships to begin final approach after outside legal obstruction fell into confusion. Kaler Venn requested emergency de-escalation talks. Elias refused a meeting, but accepted the terms packet. Task Group Sigma would withdraw to higher orbit pending external review of operational conduct. External cargo review would be suspended under neutral oversight. Sector Security Fleet would pause hazard enforcement actions until Commission inquiry findings were issued. In plain language, they were backing off without admitting retreat. Soren read the packet twice. They're trying to leave without calling it loss. Then let them leave with their language, Elias said. We already kept the ground. The first relief ship docked 6 hours later. It did not arrive to cheers. The people of Astorvale were too tired for that. It arrived to silence, med carts, dock crews, tears, and the dull, stunned gratitude of survivors who had spent too long preparing to watch a place die. Mara oversaw unloading personally. Elias helped move purifier cores before. Anyone could stop him on grounds of rank. A camera caught him doing it. The clip went everywhere. He hated that. It also helped. Across the next day, more messages came in from beyond Astorvale. Earth Command, colder and more honest than praise, informed him that the colony's defense had disrupted a likely stabilization cascade across the border sectors. Independent unions pledged emergency cargo priority to human settlements under coercive review. Several non-human legal blocs, none famous for loving Earth, called for suspension of Border Stability Commission authority pending investigation into manufactured crisis operations. Not because they had suddenly become moral, because coercion exposed too plainly frightened everyone who might be next. That was enough. Mara found Elias 29 hours after the last boarding attempt, standing in observation tier 3 beside a panel that still smelled faintly burned. Below them, the port scarred outward into black space. 2 spines were under patchwork repair. Service drones moved like insects over wounded metal. Relief ships came and went in careful sequence. You should be in a med unit, she said. He looked down at the bandage on his forearm, as if he had forgotten it existed. They wrapped it. That is not the same thing as rest. I am resting vertically. She came to stand beside him. I have a professional opinion on how irritating you are. I trusted implicitly. That drew the tired smile he had been hoping for. For a while they watched the traffic in silence. Not the grand silence of poetry. The practical one of 2 adults who had run too close to collapse and survived with language still catching up. Finally Mara said, Do you know what the worst part was? The hospital overflow? No, the certainty in their paperwork. He nodded. He didn't know. They had already decided what kind of people we were, she said. Disordered, unstable, not ready. They had already decided what would happen to us, and then they arranged the facts to fit it. Yes. And we still almost lost. Yes. She took that in without flinching. Does that bother you? More than almost losing? No. The fact that holding this place did not feel like victory until the second relief ship docked. He turned toward her. That is because real victories arrive late. First comes damage, then counting, then work. Then the thing you saved starts breathing again. Mara, look back at the docking lights. You say awful things in comforting tones. So I've been told. This time the smile lasted longer. Then she asked softer, what happens now? He could have lied. Could have said inquiry, pause, reconstruction, maybe some hard-won peace. But she had earned better than comfort. Now the border changes shape, he said. They cannot take colonies this way, as cleanly anymore. So they will try something else. Trade, energy, medicine, law. Pressure just learns. And Earth. Earth learns too. She nodded. Good. Because I'm not doing this twice the same way. He reached for her hand again, and this time neither of them let go too quickly. Below them, crews rolled oxygen manifolds into a repair bay. A civilian tug eased a grain barge into place. Somewhere deeper in the colony, people were eating full portions for the first time in days. Somewhere else, families were grieving those who would not taste the relief they helped hold open. That was the truth of it. Astorvale had survived. Astorvale had paid. Both mattered. 3 days later, Kaler Vin was removed from active border command pending review. Sel Merrick disappeared into the kind of administrative fogmen like him often used when public light became inconvenient. The Border Stability Commission denied systemic wrongdoing while quietly freezing 3 corridor supervision proposals that now looked too much like copies of a failed seizure. Lena Torvik was transferred under secure legal custody. Elias never went to see her again. Some betrayals did not improve under examination. Admiral Sarek Thorne withdrew his heavier ships beyond immediate enforcement range, though not far enough to count as peace. Frontier Command reinforced nearby human settlements in whatever quiet ways it still could, without presenting the galaxy with the image of open mobilization it had spent so many days avoiding. Aster Vale repaired itself the way colonies always did. Bolts first, grief second, memory last. The water system took 12 days to stabilize. The damaged port spine took 21 to return to reduced function. The ward in Residential South ran above safe capacity for nearly a month. People worked. They buried the dead, welded metal, counted losses, argued, and endured. And through all of it, the name Aster Vale spread far beyond the Kestrel corridor. Not as a glorious battle, as a refusal that made people pay attention. One evening, long after the emergency phase had shifted into reconstruction, Elias and Mara stood on a maintenance balcony overlooking the greenhouse ring. The plants below glowed under growth lamps in patient rows, and moisture hung warm in the air. It was one of the few places in the colony that smelled like something other than metal. Mara touched a support rail and said, "When I was young, I thought strong places were the ones that did not bend." Elias leaned beside her. "And now, I think strong places are the ones that know what they are allowed to lose and what they are not." He looked out over the green rows. Aster Vale learned that loudly. So did you. He did not deny it. For all his control, for all his patience, the crisis had stripped him down to essentials. He knew now, with terrible clarity, what kind of commander he was. Not the kind who won by spectacle. Not the kind who could save everything. Not the kind who mistook discipline for distance. He was the kind who held, until holding changed the board. Mara turned to him. "When the next one comes, and it will, do not wait so long to tell me when you are afraid." He gave her a look. She lifted one brow. "Do not insult me by pretending you never were." He let out a breath that might have been a laugh if he were a looser man. "Fine, fine, fine. I was afraid." "Of what?" He answered honestly. "That I would either give them the shot they wanted or fail to take the shot I needed." She stepped closer. "And now I know there's a third thing." "What is it?" "Enduring long enough to make them show themselves." Mara nodded slowly. "That sounds like us." Below them, growers moved between the rows with hand carts and pruning tools. Life resuming. Not soft, not pretty, real. Elias looked through the greenhouse glass toward the dark beyond the colony shell. Somewhere out, there were other human settlements, other routes, other officials drafting new language for old coercions. Somewhere out there, Earth was recalculating. Somewhere out there, the wider system had been forced, however briefly, to see humanity not as a set of conveniently pressured outposts, but as people willing to absorb punishment without handing over their own name for what was being done to them. That would not end the pressure. It would change the cost. And on the border, sometimes that was the first kind of justice people could actually feel. Weeks later, when the final casualty ledger was closed for the emergency phase, Elias went alone to Observation Tier 3. The burn marks had been partly sanded out of the panel frames, and the glass had been replaced. Below him, the repaired spines carried steady traffic again. Not full traffic, not yet, but enough to sound like a pulse returning. The first Earth convoy under the new emergency corridor doctrine came in under heavy legal escort and union witness. The cargo list was simple. Food, water systems, medical stock, shield components, transit relays. No speeches, no ceremony. Just the material proof that Aster Vale had not been abandoned and had not been absorbed. Elias stood with one hand against the new glass and watched the convoy settle into position. A younger officer might have called it triumph. He did not. It was better than triumph. It was continuation. Behind him, the observation door opened. He knew the footstep before he turned. Mara came to stand beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "They made it on time," she said. "Yes. That feels strange." "It does." Below them, the first cargo locks engaged. Dock crews moved into place. Loaders lifted. Lights shifted from caution red to working white. Mara exhaled softly. "Do you think the galaxy learned anything?" Elias watched the convoy, the workers, the scarred port that still functioned, and the colony that had almost been renamed by other people's paperwork and had instead kept its own voice. "Some of it did," he said, "and the rest will learn the harder way." They stood there together while the first containers rolled onto Astorvale's repaired decks. A colony had been squeezed, staged, weakened, and nearly converted into a precedent. Instead, it had become a warning. Not that humanity was invincible, and not that the system was fair. Only this: people who could be pressured could also endure. Human colonies were not empty holdings waiting for management. Earth, for all its distance and flaws and delayed strength, still reached back when the line held long enough. And a quiet commander, standing in a damaged port, might do more to change the border than 100 polished speeches in safe. Rooms far away, outside the glass, the convoy lights burned steady against the dark. Inside the colony, machines breathed, workers shouted, med carts rolled, and life, battered but unbroken, went on. That was enough for now. That was the kind of victory the border trusted. And that is where we leave Astorvale. Not unscarred, not untouched, but still standing. Because in the end, this was never just about one colony, one blockade, or one commander force to hold the line. It was about what happens when a system tries to break people slowly, quietly, and lawfully, and still fails. Astorvale did not survive because it was the strongest place in the galaxy. It survived because enough people refused to surrender what made them human. If this story stayed with you, or gave you something to think about, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who loves grounded science fiction, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps this channel keep going, and it helps more listeners find stories like this one. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And thank you for supporting the journey. Until the next story.